In 1978, the horror landscape was not what it is today. Horror films existed, but the genre was largely untapped. That is, until John Carpenter's Halloween burst on the scene. And it exploded, breaking records while terrorizing audiences. But behind this masterpiece was a small, inexperienced crew. The success of Halloween is undeniable. Here is a story of Halloween behind the blood. Hey everybody, I'm Jason Pelligra, host of The Horror Slash. In 1978, Halloween burst onto the scene, and it changed horror films forever. Now we've heard that before, but in this case, it's pretty valid. Most of us have seen the film, many of us have seen it hundreds of times, but behind this masterpiece was a little engine that could, and did. So it's hard to believe now, but in 1978, horror films had kind of a weak grasp on film audiences. Sure, there were some films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Last House on the Left, and there were some explosions in horror films like The Exorcist that came, but they kind of came and went away. The genre wasn't budding from these films. In many ways, Halloween owes its existence to a little low-budget Canadian film called Black Christmas, which inspired John Carpenter. But hold on. Let's start from the beginning. This isn't a Tarantino show. It all starts with Irwin Yablans, or as his friends call him, the Lawnmower Man. Actually, they don't. Yablans was a producer kind of in a crossroads of his career when he decided to start up a distribution company. His early focus was low-budget films. It was actually Yablans who conceived of the idea of having a psychopathic killer hunt down babysitters. His rationale was, everybody's been a babysitter, if not everybody's had a babysitter, or I think everybody's been a baby, so he wasn't reaching very far. The title he came up with was the not so obvious The Babysitter Murderers. Yablans, quickly acting like a producer, wanted to keep the logistics and budget in check. In order to do so, he conceived of the idea of it happening in one night. But what night? Now it seems kind of obvious, given that this episode's called Halloween, but hold the phone, Chuck. That's an interesting story too. When Yablans did some research, he realized that the word Halloween had never been used as a film title. In fact, Halloween had never even been part of a film title. Now it's pretty hard to imagine in this day and age where everybody's got a username and a URL and a website and all that stuff. But even in 1978, that was a pretty awesome stroke of luck. So one of the first tasks of a producer is find your director. Yablans turned to USC film student John Carpenter. The two had already teamed up on Assault on Precinct 13, so the familiarity was there. But was John good for the job? When approached, John Carpenter was interested because he needed a job. But he had two requests. One, full creative control, and two, his name would appear above the titles. Which is kind of a weird request for, let's face it, an unknown director. Now it fits, but back then, who the hell cared if John Carpenter's name was above Halloween? Well, I guess he did, hence the request. Okay, so would Yablans agree to those terms? The answer? Yeah. Why though? Well, John Carpenter promised to bring the film in for $300,000 and 4 weeks, which is 20 shooting days. That's not a lot. He also was signed on to write and score the film. That's not a bad deal. For a producer, you found your man. John Carpenter was signed on for all of those tasks for $10,000 plus 10% of the profits of the film, which, once we get to box office and business later on, you'll see what a shrewd move that one was. Moving on, we need a script. So John contacted Deborah Hill, who he had worked with before. She was a script supervisor. The way they divided it up was John would work on all the suspense and horror and evil in the script, while Deborah Hill would helm the characters, and particularly the girls, and dialogue and such. So John Carpenter was off doing directory thingies, and Yablans had to still raise the money for the film. So he went up to producer Mustafa Akkad, who later on went on to be the godfather of Halloween. But when Yablans approached Akkad, Akkad was actually kind of hesitant because the budget seemed too low. He thought it was kind of like a rinky-dink student film. So he was very, very hesitant to get involved. However, Yablans, being a great producer, convinced them, and the money was in place, and Halloween was off to the races. The script was completed in 3 weeks. It was designed to take place in suburban America, so it could happen anywhere. The actual town is fictitious, although Haddonfield, Illinois is fictitious in the film, Haddonfield, New Jersey is real, and that's actually Deborah Hill's hometown. So the 29-year-old filmmaker was now in complete control of the film we all know and love today. Pump the brakes for a second. If you think it was all fun and games, well, it kind of was, but it was hard work. When it came to casting Halloween, the main role of Laurie Strode went to Jamie Lee Curtis. Originally, John Carpenter wanted Anne Lockhart to play the role. Jamie Lee got the role for two reasons. One, she was the daughter of famed Psycho actress Janet Leigh, and two, she was the best for the role. I'm totally calling BS on this, and thank you Deborah Hill, who actually just came clean and said, hey, it was stunt casting. PJ Soles was John Carpenter's first choice for the role after coming off of Carrie. Funny enough, at the time, PJ Soles was married to famous actor Dennis Quaid, who was in line for the role of Bob, but with scheduling issues, it never really happened. But it's okay because we all got to see Dennis Quaid in Jaws 3D. For the role of Annie, Nancy Loomis was brought in, who had worked with John Carpenter before. I guess he loved her brilliant acting, and therefore, okay, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm sorry. Her acting actually almost sinks this film.
I'm never smiling again. Poor Lori. Scared another one away. Oh, hi, Paul.
Stuck, huh?
All right, cut it out. It can happen to anyone.
But we're gonna get past that because we're gonna assume she's a really nice person. Finally, a star was needed to play the lead, Dr. Loomis. So when Peter Cushing says no, you go to Christopher Lee. And when Christopher Lee says no, you turn to Donald Pleasance. And when Donald Pleasance says yes, you hit the jackpot. It's hard to imagine anybody else playing Dr. Loomis, but the amazing Donald Pleasance. Funny story is, Lee went on to say that that was the biggest mistake of his career. Now, I'm assuming he said that in the late 70s, early 80s, because he made some movies that were really, really bad. Like, there was way bigger mistakes in there, I'm telling you. And finally, Charles Cypress was brought in to play Sheriff Brackett, who I love. I love Charles and I love Brackett. But really, Sheriff Brackett was kind of useless in this film if you think about it. Aside from being Dr. Loomis's chauffeur, if we follow a broken timeline, stay with me for this. For example, if you take Laurie when she looks out the school window and sees Michael Myers wearing a mask, then we fast forward to at the end of a school day when Laurie had a chance to go home, get ready, and they're driving by the hardware store. He's just then answering the call to a robbery. The alarms are still sounding, which means they've been sounding all day, but we won't get into that. Also, he sticks his head into a car where two people were smoking pot and doesn't smell anything. I don't know. Brackett's character was a good one, but maybe not so good a cop. But he did provide the awesome creepy cop moment. Have a look. Totally checked out her ass. And last but not least, who would play the killer, Michael Myers? Well, Nick Castle was John Carpenter's USC buddy in film school. So he was wandering around the set, wanted to learn filmmaking, which is kind of a weird story because if you went to USC with John Carpenter to learn film, why is he learning from John Carpenter on set? I don't know. Anyways. But the bottom line is, John Carpenter said, hey, if you're gonna be here, you're gonna work $25 a day, put on this mask, you are the killer, and a star is born. Well, okay, maybe not a star, but he seems like a really cool guy, so. And Nick Castle also went on to have a pretty good filmmaking career. The mask used for Michael Myers was purchased by set deck Tommy Lee Wallace. The choices were a clown or what ended up being the classic Michael Myers mask, which was a William Shatner Star Trek mask. What they did was they purchased it, spray painted it white, cut out the eye holes a little bit, altered the hair, and that was it. Funny story is William Shatner himself didn't even know that his face was the iconic mask of Michael Myers until many, many, many years later. And in typical William Shatner fashion, he got a real kick out of it. Sadly, in subsequent films, the mask just went different directions. The director of photography on Halloween was the now seasoned pro Dean Cundey, who went on to do films such as the Back to the Future trilogy, Jurassic Park, Apollo 13, plenty of Spielberg films. Dean Cundey was inspired by the color palette of Chinatown and duplicated it for Halloween. So Halloween, Chinatown, right? Director tricks of the trade, as most films, it was shot out of sequence. So in order for the character to grasp the severity and tension of the scene, John Carpenter created a terror scale. Some Halloween sequences were played out more for artistic value than actual reality. For example, the scene with Judith Myers making out with her boyfriend. They then go upstairs and seemingly have sex within maybe about 80 seconds, and that includes getting undressed, getting dressed, doing the deed, and heading back downstairs. Hey, we can't all be Sting. One of the questions thrown around is, how did Michael Myers learn how to drive? Well, in the original Halloween novel, it was described that Sam Loomis would drive Michael Myers back and forth from hearings and court cases, and all the while Michael Myers was astutely observing Sammy's driving. Principal photography for Halloween began in early May of 1978 in Los Angeles, California. So there are inherent problems. First off, have you ever tried finding a pumpkin in May? Yeah, it's not easy. Second, leaves. Colored leaves in May in California, not gonna happen. Shedding leaves, not gonna happen. So prop leaves were bagged up and transported from set to set and blown all over the place, then collected and repeat, collect and repeat. Filmmaking, it's not as fun as you think. Donald Pleasence was brought in for $20,000 to do 5 days work, which worked out to be about 18 minutes of screen time. But his performance would be iconic, and not only with this Halloween, but in subsequent films to follow, his character would be a staple of the franchise before he passed away in 1995 after making 6 Halloween films. Actually, 5, but he passed away after part 6, but wasn't in part 3, but you know that. John Carpenter wanted the antagonist of Halloween to be completely unrelatable, which is another example of why John Carpenter beats to his own drum. Scriptwriting 101, even your antagonist should have some form of relatability to him.
You know how I got these scars?
In this case, John went with it, and I think it worked out fine. The killer in the film was the ominous Shape, or Michael Myers. Michael Myers was actually the name of a European distributor who John Carpenter attributes for inspiring him quite a bit. So he made him the killer. The tendency in script writing, and in particular horror films, is to over-explain. John Carpenter wanted to intentionally leave gaps in the stories for the audience to fill in their own horrifying conclusions, figuring that they would probably be more terrifying than what could be shown on screen. The crew of Halloween was very, very young and very, very inexperienced, and it was an all hands on deck on the set of Halloween. Even the stars pitched in, which made it a very, very cool environment. People actually liked working on this film. When the film was completed, it was played for a Hollywood executive by John Carpenter, but without the iconic score that would accompany Halloween for years to come. The film fell flat and the exec, hated it. Under the credited name, the Bowling Green Philharmonic, John Carpenter's hometown, the score was created for Halloween. And to this day, people associate that film score with the soundtrack to almost anything horror. When the film was completed, the Oblongs had a new issue. No studio wanted it. So he decided to use his own company, Compass International, which I don't know why he wouldn't have thought of that in the first place. And MGM delivered 400 prints, and Halloween was off. Halloween opened on October 25th, 1978 in Kansas City to less than stellar audiences. However, word of mouth kicked in and the film's popularity grew and the box office grew and the film became the hit that we know it to be today.
Totally.
With that being said, it wasn't until it played the Chicago International Film Festival when Halloween became a bona fide commercial and who knew, critical hit. Halloween exploded. It made $47 million. So remember way back when John Carpenter negotiated 10% of all profits? And so what does that mean? $47 million. Well, if Halloween was released in 2019, that would be upwards of $182 million. And it would still be 100 million times better than freaking Avatar. One of the amazing things about Halloween was because it was a low budget film, it was all shot on location, and many of those locations exist today. So if you're in California, you can cross some awesome horror locations off your bucket list. Let's take a look at where you can find some awesome Halloween locations. The South Pasadena High School at 1401 Fremont Avenue in South Pasadena was obviously where they shot some of the high school sequences where Linda, Annie, and Lori were walking home from school. Now, one of the cool things is the Myers house in the late 80s was going to be torn down. However, it was saved and moved, relocated, which, you know, you could look at as a bad thing, but when you see where it got relocated, it was pretty cool. So if you go to 1000 Mission Street, you will see the Myers house, which now serves as a real estate office, which is kind of cool because it's accessible. The funny thing is the house was actually moved right adjacent to the hardware store, which you can also visit at 966 Mission Street. So you can knock two off your list right there. The Doyle house is at 1530 North Orange Grove Avenue, and at 1537 North Orange Grove Avenue, you can visit the Wallace House. Tommy Doyle's school could be visited at 110 West McLean Street, Alhambra, California, and of course the infamous hedge scene where so many fans have stopped to take pictures can be visited at 1019 Montrose Avenue, South Pasadena, California. All right, Halloween rapid facts. October 31st, 1978 was a Tuesday. The actress that plays Lindsay Wallace, Kylie Richards, went on to be in The Housewives of Hollywood. The character of Bob looks like he's 57. Doesn't he? And he looks old. Michael Myers offs almost as many dogs in this film as he does humans. 2 dogs, 4 humans. John Carpenter was the voice of Paul on the phone. In the opening sequence, where little Michael Myers opens the drawer and grabs the knife that would later kill his sister Judith, those hands were Deborah Hill's. The opening sequence was shot with the brand new Steadicam, which would go on to revolutionize the film industry. In this case, it was called the Panaglide. When it originally aired on television, more scenes were ordered to fill in time slots to make it a 2-hour block, as well as to compensate for the horrifying elements that were cut out of the film. So John Carpenter, against his better wishes, went back and shot some extra scenes, including a court scene and a scene between Linda and Jamie Lee Curtis, which was kind of cool because even though John Carpenter didn't like it, if you're a fan like me, it was like a kid in a candy store. Whenever it was on TV, you would get these extra scenes. So that wraps it up for the first episode of Behind the Blood. What a better film than to kick it off with Halloween. Please watch subsequent shows that are going to be on here, plus other shows, other concepts that we're going to have on the Horror/YouTube channel. Please subscribe, tell your friends, send this link, and follow us on Instagram for all the fun updates